So as I was introduced, my name is Andrew. I'm Gardner's son, and so that's how I'm connected here. I wanted to open up by sharing a little bit about kind of how I grew up. I grew up in Siberia, Russia, in Kyiv, Ukraine. For those of you who know, my parents raised me as a missionary kid overseas. So when I was about 14 years old, I came back to the United States and back to Renton, Washington. So that's where my parents continue to live. And while I was there, I attended Bellevue College doing Running Starts. So seeing that video, C103, I used to attend Chi Alpha's Bible study meetings there as well. So that was really cool to find that out today. When I was 17 years old, so I prayed the prayer when I was 4 and asked Jesus to come to my heart. I prayed the prayer again when I was 5, and again when I was 6, again when I was 7. And every time there was an altar call, every time I saw a Jesus film movie, there's always a little prayer at the end. And I would go to my mom and I'd say, "Mom, how do I know I'm really a Christian?" And she would say, "Well, did you ask Jesus to come into your heart?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, were you sincere?" And I said, I think so. And she said, "Well, then that's the devil bothering you. You don't need to worry about it." And so I began to learn to trust in my decision to believe in Jesus rather than to trust in Jesus. Until I was about 17, and I began asking God, I think this was His grace in my life in the first place that I even asked this question, but I began asking Him if He would give me an experience of Him that I would never forget. And I was wrapped up in quite a few different very nasty sins, mostly secret sins. On the outside, I was a good Christian. And as I was more and more disgusted with my behavior, I began asking God, would you just change me? I've prayed this prayer, I've asked Him into my heart, the whole thing, but it's not a reality in my life. And as I began to pray that, I can't identify a moment in my life where everything changed. But over the course of the summer, or right before my senior year of high school, so my last year at Bellevue College, my life began to change. The sins I used to enjoy began to disgust me. It wasn't a matter of willpower, it was just a matter of desire. My desires began to change, and the things that I didn't usually care about, reading my Bible, praying, and telling people about the Lord, right, evangelism, began to become the passion of my life. And so over the course of about 3 weeks, as those changes began taking place, I started my priorities for my career and what I wanted to do with my life began to change. And I finished my last year at Bellevue College, and then as I was looking at which college to apply for, I really felt God calling me to WSU. Wazoo, from at least my high school, had the reputation of being the party school of the state of Washington. That's where all of the people who can't get the best grades go, but who want to party go, right? So I thought, you know what, if that's where all of the lost people are, that's where I want to be. And so, but maybe for a different reason than most people who want to go where all the lost people are. So I applied to WSU, got accepted, and went there to study criminal justice. And while I was there, I actually was part of Chi Alpha there and a couple other missions groups like Campus Crusade and Navigators. And while I was there, I began reaching out to students. I was an RA, for those of you who know what that is. It's like a little supervisor for a dormitory floor. And I was leveraging that to introduce Christ to students. While I was there, though, God did something I didn't really appreciate. I don't know if you've ever had that where He does something that doesn't make you very comfortable. I was at WSU. There was a street preacher who came to my campus. His name is Keith Darrell. Is this very stocky, short, muscular man with a red beard and red hair, and he'd come and he'd preach on campus. And everybody would freak out when he'd get there. He was the talk on campus. And I'm doing evangelism with my buddies, right? We're building relationships with people over tea, and we had tea time is what we called it. I'd serve tea to a bunch of my classmates and friends, and they'd come over and we'd have conversations about the Lord. And all of my friends within the Christian ministries I was a part of were judging the street preacher, being like, he's given us a bad rap. People are, this is a stumbling block for us when we're trying to share the gospel. The fact that he keeps coming here and, rattling up on campus. But what I found was when I went and listened to this guy, he wasn't saying anything that I really disagreed with. He was preaching the truth, and he wasn't doing it in a mean way. I delineate between street preachers and street screechers. And this guy was a street preacher. And I began to realize that this man, when he'd come on campus, our tea time, right, we would affect change for 6 to 7 people. And praise the Lord, because God cares about each and every one of us, right? But when I would watch him, he'd affect change on the entire campus. The culture of the campus would change when he came to our campus. Hundreds, if not thousands of students would be surrounding him, most of whom were listening to his debate with the hecklers. And I would go and I would begin working the crowd. So I'd go to the different crowd members. I'd say, hey, what do you think about this crazy guy? And as we'd get into conversations, I began to realize that the connections that this man was making for me was way beyond what I was actually doing with my personal connections at tea time. And that's when the discomfort settled in, because I realized that God was calling me to be a street preacher. I did not want to do that at all. And as I was reading through the scriptures, every time I'd read about really anyone in the scriptures, the part where they were preaching in the open air would jump out at me, right? Jesus, his Sermon on the Mount. He gets in the boat or on the lake. You got Paul on Mars Hill, and you got Peter in Acts 2 on Pentecost. You have all of the prophets always in the open air. And the reactions they got were usually much worse than the reactions this guy got. And yet God called them to preach. And so eventually I did that, began open air preaching on my campus, and I got to see the fruit of that ministry in a pretty incredible way. And now, since then, I did a few internships after I graduated and started a gospel-centered abortion ministry, which is something I'd love to share a little bit more about when I have some more time. This Saturday, we're doing a dessert party. My dad and his wife are hosting a dessert party for anybody who wants to come and learn a little bit more about what we do and who we are as Tiny Heartbeats. So if you're interested this Saturday night, please come talk to me after the service, and I'd love to share more. So thank you.